What's up, everybody? This is the People Man Talks podcast, and I'm your host, Emanuel Solomon, the People Man. I'm an interpersonal skills coach who helps high-performing professionals of color to promote and reposition through increasing their cultural, emotional intelligence. I coach because I have a passion. I have a passion for helping professionals of color to reach their highest heights of their potential. And today, I am excited, super excited to have Emille Bryant, who is he's a consultant. He specializes in mindset. One of the things about Emille that is so great is that he's done um, so many different types of entrepreneurial ventures. He's a speaker, he's a consultant, he's a coach, he's an author of Start with the Sparkle. And he likes to work with the hungriest, most driven decision makers to create value for their customers and clients. So without further ado, please welcome Emille Bryant to the People Man Talks podcast.
Good to be here, Emanuel. Thank you very much for having me on. And you say too much about me. I should be modest, but I learned after being in the military for 24 years that the only person who's going to sell me is me. So thank you for giving me such a boost. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. I love showcasing talent, and it's really rare to be able to do that when it's your family. For some reason, it seems like my family has so much talent. And I feel like Black people and brown people have so much talent anyway, but just to have talent within your family that you can showcase is a blessing. And so I'm just excited to have you on the show. You've done so many things. You're an inspiration to a lot of people and me as well. And I've been able to pick your brain and get a lot of great insight for my business. And so just tell me a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So my primary job is as a consultant. I do three basic things for any client. The first is strategy. So I was a logistician and aircraft maintenance officer in the military. So my focus is always thinking 4, 5, 6, 10 moves down the line. So the first thing I want to do is I want to be able to help a person who works with me, especially those hungry, driven business owners and decision makers, see down the field. So I like to have a different way of looking at the world that allows me to develop a strategy that's in line with the goals and the thoughts and the plans for the people that I work with. The second thing I do is that I take that strategy and I turn it into an actionable plan. And part of the reason why I do it this way is because when you start with a strategy, you start with a big vision, a big goal, and you break that down into an action plan. What you're really doing is you're saying these are the steps that you must take to get there. But see, here's the problem, and this is what you were talking about, is most people don't understand the mindset to develop a strategy, and they don't understand the mindset to develop an action plan, because it's not what you think. You're not in business to make money. You're in business to provide a service. And along the way, if you provide a service properly, you will make gobs of money. The third thing I do that is probably one of my greater talents is I facilitate. So put me in a room full of people who are trying to resolve a situation, or who are trying to advance an agenda, or who are trying to come up with goals for the mission. Mm-hmm. I specialize in working with people and bringing them to a consensus. I have a way of hearing that allows me to see inside people's minds and understand what they're really trying to say. Develop that using a whiteboard or some common communication device. And from that, everybody begins to come of one accord. They understand what they're trying to do together, and then they go forward and get it done together. So my consulting consists of strategy development, action plan development, and facilitation. And then I'm a writer and a speaker as well. And so between all of those, the common factor is I work with people. I don't program computers. I don't build, inventions. I work with people, and my job is to make sure that they are the best they can be, so they can deliver the best service or best product that they're trying to develop.
Okay. I like that. You were really concise and I feel like the audience knows what you do. And if they want to get better, and I'm assuming your main customer or clients are business owners.
I prefer working with business owners and decision makers. And the decision maker is someone who has decision authority in a business and who has the ability to execute the decisions they make. So that means that they have a budget or they have a team. I prefer working with people who are at that level, because what it does is it means that we can start building practical steps to success, and we don't have to wait for permission.
Right.
That's the thing that stops a lot of people, is the permission step. I don't want to deal with that. So in this phase of my business, I'm only working with people who are ready to execute and have the resources to do it.
Right. And that becomes sometimes an issue, even with sales, because as a business owner myself, I know that sometimes clearing out the people that actually can't make decisions is part of your sales process, because a lot of people will say, hey, I got this great idea. I'm like, yeah, that is great. But if you can't make it happen, if you don't have the power to make it happen, then we're just spinning our wheels. And, I don't have time for that. And obviously you don't. So that's great that you said that. Where can they find you at? If they want to look you up, if they want to find out what you do, where would they go and how would they find you?
The best way to get a hold of me is myname.com. So when you share me with people on YouTube or whatever, my name is spelled EmilleBryant.com. You can go to my book, startwithasparkle.com, and learn about what I've written. I have an online course that helps people learn how to be more creative, more energetic, more bold as leaders. That's brazencreativity.com. So those are the main ways that you can get a hold of me. EmilleBryant.com, startwithasparkle.com, or brazencreativity.com. I'm also all over the internet. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of them, Emille Bryant, all the same.
Okay. And one of the things I wanted to say too, for all the viewers out there that don't know why this is important to me, not just showcasing my family members that are high performing professionals of color, but there's a goal here. And the three areas that we focus on in really helping high performing professionals of color to promote and reposition. I've talked about cultural, emotional intelligence, but some of the three areas where I really like to highlight are the mental aspects of growth, the emotional aspects of growth, and the cultural aspects of growth. So in this show, you'll always see something along those lines. Mental, emotional, how to actually connect with people on a deeper level to be able to either provide service or just connect in general, because connecting is a gift in itself. Or culturally, which is understanding ourselves culturally and ethnically on a deep level, because that's so much of our identity, and a lot of that has been stripped away.
Right.
So I really like to make sure that the folks that I bring on the show are going to highlight or strengthen us in those three areas. And I have a few guests that might not necessarily fit all those things, but that is one area we want to continue to keep on strengthening. Black and brown professionals of color, high performers, is that mental, emotional, and cultural pieces. And so mindset seems to be something that is very crucial to how you do things, how you develop your strategies, how you position yourself. So how do you define mindset, and why is it important?
Sure. So imagine that your mindset is the base resting state of your mind. It's the place your mind runs to when there's nothing else to do, right? So your mindset can be positive, it can be creative, or it can be boring. Your mindset is that place that your mind just goes to all the time first, and then from there it goes to wherever. So when you talk about building mental capacity, mental state, we can shift that mindset from something less productive to something more productive. And a lot of people of color, professionals of color, have been given a mindset to be successful in one element of their life, yet haven't been given the other mindset of tapping into their culture and their superpower in terms of knowing who they are historically in order to build a holistically balanced mindset. So a mindset is like when you say to yourself, oh, I shouldn't have done that. The person who said I shouldn't have done that, that's the mindset. When you are talking about, I'm having a bad day, the person who speaks about the bad day, that's the mindset. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to develop that mindset so that it can see positive, negative, and neutral behavior and then shift that mindset toward more positive outcomes. So instead of saying, I'm having a bad day, the mind that speaks that mindset says, rather, what do I need to do to make this day the best it can be? Mm-hmm. Right? And so when you start looking at how your mind responds to your thoughts, remember the thinking mind, the part of you that thinks, is being listened to by somebody. That somebody is the mindset. And so we want to get beyond the thought, beyond the feeling, and get to the part of the mind that actually is doing the work of monitoring and saying, oh, you shouldn't have said that. Oh, you shouldn't have done that. Or, oh, that's the right thing to do. It's the motivation. It's all those parts of you that push your thoughts toward where you want to go. And when we develop that mindset, we can do amazing things because now we are consciously aware of what we're thinking and doing and how we're feeling. And then we can shift toward whatever we want.
So kind of shifting from that place of unconscious or subconscious programming and kind of becoming more aware of those subconscious behaviors and reprogramming them to help you to have better outcomes for your life. I think that, we explain it in different ways, but that's a part of what I do as well with emotional intelligence and framing different ideals and pushing our emotion to different places so that we can benefit from that emotion rather than being captive to those.
Absolutely.
Things. So, mindset does come into play and thinking comes into play when dealing with emotional intelligence. But what I want to do is ask you, you talk about mindset, you teach mindset, but what went into you developing a successful mindset? What's your story?
Necessity. Okay. I have a joke that's 100% true. And my mother, who will probably watch this podcast, will laugh because I tell this story all the time, but it's 100% true. I was 16 years old. I was a junior in high school. It's my first semester. My mother asked me the question that changed my life. She said, how are you paying for college? And at that point, I had flirted with the Air Force Academy. I knew I wanted to go there, but I wasn't serious because I hadn't done anything remotely, unlike today where you can go to a website. I had to go through a process just to say I was interested, and I had not gone through that process. And so her question forced me to answer that question, right? I had to answer, how am I paying? What do you mean I'm paying for college? I thought she's like, no, time out.
Right.
I will have done all of the work I was supposed to do to get you to graduate. You're going to have to take on the responsibility for your success after high school. I said, that's fine. So let me begin to get serious about my desire to go to the Air Force Academy. I sent off the information. You had to put it in the mail, and you had to wait 3 days, a week, and then finally something comes back to you. Once I was on their radar, they called and they began to interact with me, and that accelerated the process. And I went through the process and ended up at the prep school. So the mindset came out of this need to be serious about my future. And so in order for you to go to some place like the Air Force Academy, you can't be defeatist. You can't say, I can't do it. You're not going to win anything if you say it's impossible. Mm-hmm. And there was a moment in my very young life where my best friend in the world and to this day, one of the people who has sustained me through thick and thin. You know him as your uncle. He's my cousin. And one of the things that he told me was nothing is impossible. Because I used to be defeatist. I used to think when I was 19 years old, I used to think if it can't be done once, it can't be done ever. And he said, nothing is impossible. He yelled at me. He said, nothing is impossible. Stop thinking everything is impossible. So it took that moment when I was about 10 years old, and then my mother's question when I was 16, and the two came together, and I understood that nothing was impossible for me in my adult life. And from that, I began to develop the mindset of whatever challenge is in front of me, I can overcome. So then it was, I went to the Air Force Academy Preparatory School, and I learned how to become a military member, and then I earned my way into the academy. And then I was at the academy. Freshman year at any military academy is incredibly hard, but every day I was able to get through each day. And then I learned how to be positive, no matter who was yelling at me, no matter how little I ate, no matter what time I woke up for push-ups and sit-ups, no matter how many things I had to do that were insane, and how polished my shoes need to be, and all the things that we did that a military academy instilled. I learned from that. Nothing is impossible. I lived it every day. I graduated from the Air Force Academy. I got on active duty, and I was faced with situations where I was in charge of 80, 90 people as a young man. That was hard, but I had the mindset that I can overcome. I learned and grew. So at every turn, I developed from those two experiences, my cousin telling me nothing is impossible at 10, my mother asking me how I was going to pay for college. Between those two, I began to develop a mindset that nothing truly was impossible. So then it was just step by step every day, never seeing things as so hard, so impossible that it couldn't be done. And then it was
almost like a paradigm shift. I mean, it seems like you almost like changed your whole worldview.
It took those two catalysts, and then the experience of going through the military year after year before I began to consciously be aware of that mindset shift. And then when I finally got to it, which was probably in my mid-20s when I was conscious of it, I began to see that I was indomitable. There was no challenge that anyone could place in front of me. I learned about jazz. I was a hip hop head back in the day. This is, from the 80s into the 90s and the golden era of hip hop.
Is that what you call a golden age of hip hop? We might be debating on that, but go ahead. I'm gonna let you go. The 80s and 90s. Wait, hold on. I might say 90s.
All of the greatest.
I might say 90s. Go ahead.
All of the greatest came out of those 2 decades. You can holler at me later, right? Okay. If you want to talk about the GOAT, I'll give you Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole in this era, but I'll take you back to Melly Mel in another era. I'll take you back to LL Cool J.
I would say I'm saying Nas and Jay-Z. Like I grew up on Nas and Jay-Z, and I got a little bit of Rakim, and I got a little bit of Run DMC, and I got a little bit of that just from my uncles, But yeah, man. But yeah, I don't want to take you off your grind. But what you were telling me was that you developed this mindset that nothing is impossible, and it was cultivated. It was a cultivated mindset through opposition, through challenge, through triumph, and then you created that mindset. You had to develop it. It didn't just come overnight. And I think that's one thing, when viewers are actually looking and they're looking for a coach or a consultant, it's our job to be able to help you to get to that place in your mind, or get to that paradigm shift where where it would have took you 5, 10, 15 years to develop. We've boiled it down to the things that we've found to be true, and now you can do it in 6 months and get the same type of results. So I think that's really important that our audience and viewers understand that. Is like people go through a lot of pain to be able to put out that that course or that lesson or that teaching or those months and months. So if you really want to shortcut your shortcut, then you're gonna have to put in some dollar bills, y'all. For real, because nothing is free.
It's time is money.
Right?
See, what people don't understand is time is money. But what we've been taught too many times, and I'm gonna go back to hip hop in a second because I want you to hear this from hip hop and jazz that affects professionals of color.
Okay.
Time is money, but here's what most of us have been taught: you work for so much time, you make so much money. Very few people are willing to understand that when I am consulting with you, when you're coaching with someone, your life experience is also money. And what that means is you're charging people to go through a system of thought. You are taking people through all of the experiences that you've had, and you're distilling those into something that they can use right away. So now their time is not spent learning lessons you've already learned. And now when they spend money with you, when they spend money with me, they're not spending money and getting a brain. They're getting a chance to learn how to shift their mindset towards something that will save them over many years the pain that you and I had to endure. Building a mindset takes time for everyone. The difference is, do you know what you're intending to do before you start, or will you have to learn about it after, right? So when you can begin with the end in mind, right? When a jazz musician begins with a melody and then they depart from the melody and do this beautiful virtuosity, this beautiful improvisation, they know that they're coming back to that melody. They know the end before they begin. And when you do that in hip hop, it's the same thing. If a DJ is scratching on a turntable, they've got a beat that they're working from, and they do their improvisation based on that beat. But they always know to come back to this beat because that's the place from which all things started. So when you are consulting, especially when you're working with people of color and people of color who are looking for help, what you have to remember is there's a point at which we, the people who have the experience, who have the knowledge, who have gone through the very sweaty, painful process of distilling what we have experienced in the lessons we teach. What we're telling you is you get to start from our end. You don't have to go through your end and then figure it out.
Yeah.
Right? That's where time and money interchange, because what I'm doing is I'm shortcutting your experiential learning so that you don't have to figure out what you learned at the end. You can start with, I need to move my mindset from I'm defeated before I start to nothing is impossible. How do I do that? And we say, well, let's take a look at where you are today, and let's look at where you want to be and figure out the path to get you there so you can begin with the end in mind. And once we do that, we change the game. We shift every paradigm by starting with beginning with the end in mind and working forward instead of waiting until the end and then looking back.
You know, what I wanted to ask you as well, Emille, you developed this mindset over time, but I want the audience, I want the viewers to kind of understand some of the habits that you created to help you to sustain that powerful mindset. Are there a few things that you can give us?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the most powerful habits that I have today is I journal frequently. Usually between 2 and 4 times a week, I journal. I capture everything. It's a stream of consciousness. I don't journal. I don't have a prompt. I just go in. I say, oh, I've had an experience that I need to capture. I had a day I need to capture. I had a moment I need to capture. Journaling has been incredibly valuable.
Yes.
It saved my sanity in more ways than I can count. Another one is I read a lot. So I read everything from current events to historical tomes. I'm big into Black history because I believe what I experienced, others have experienced. So it's not just nothing is impossible to me, but I read Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, Eldridge Cleaver, all of the great ones, Ida B. Wells, all of the great teachers and thinkers of the past. They remind me, they help me understand. I was big into Black military history for many, many years. So I was learning about Benjamin O. Davis Jr. and Benjamin O. Davis Sr. and all of the great military leaders and Clarence Carter and all of these just amazing leaders, Fred Victor Cherry, like all of these amazing military leaders who reminded me that what they went through, I could do. Their lessons learned are my lessons learned. Their lessons lived are my lessons lived. I'm not separate from my history. I am a part of history. So the lessons that I've learned, I give to you, I give to my children, I give to generations beyond because I've written a book and I'm writing others. So these are the habits that got me not only to change my mindset, but they cemented the mindset. They cemented that shift because without journaling and without reading, I would have been subject to the winds of change every day.
So you mentioned journaling, you mentioned reading books. These are basic habits for success that I've read, that I've learned, that I continue to do for a long time. But everybody doesn't do those things. Tell me about the now this is stuff that basically is free except for time, right? I mean, you're trading your time in hopes that the information that you get is going to help you move forward in your life, right? You help your paradigms,
Absolutely.
help your mindset. But what things have you done? What habits have you created for financial investment in yourself?
So probably the most overlooked, underappreciated, and certainly undervalued habit that will directly affect your financial future is deep and consistent thought. Thinking, the very active thought process. See, what most people do is they react to conditions, they react to circumstances. So if you set a goal, say I want to be a millionaire, let's say you want to be, if you're a young man or woman, you're listening, you're 25, I want to be a millionaire by 40, right? That's a reasonable goal. How do I get there from here? Well, you read and you study, but then you have to start thinking, because the problem with most of us is because we're always reacting to stimuli. We're not actually thinking with our entire brain. So you actually have to spend conscious time just thinking. What does that do? What it does is it allows you to start creating the plan for the thing you set out as a goal. So if you're 25, 27 years old and you want to be a millionaire by 40, and you sit down and you take hours of just thought, you're looking at your personal resources, you're looking at your skill set, you're looking at your path to success, and you're beginning to organize those things in a very coherent and cogent manner. Because you're thinking, you're now going to access more parts of your life that you can integrate into your overall life plan. Thinking is so underrated, it's not even funny. It's free, but it's not easy because people are not used to silence and they're not used to doing something with no quote unquote outcome, right? We want immediate gratification, and thinking is a delayed gratification activity. So thinking, and then when you move out of thought and you go into action, your action reflects thought. So now you are going to be consistently thinking through every step you take. When it comes to building, visualization is thinking, and it's part of the overall process. And so you need to be going back and forth. Does my action meet my vision? Does my intent meet my desire? Do the things I want to do match the things I do every day? And when we start having this consistent thought practice, this habit of thinking, it transforms everything. But you have to slow down and you have to start really thinking about what problem are you trying to solve and how are you going to solve it and what resources you have available to you to solve it. You know, the other thing is, go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry to cut you off. I was gonna say though that you seem to have these already built-in questions to help to frame your mindset, and that's been huge in my life because it helps. These questions create triggers, and these triggers help me to move out of my subconscious behavior. Because one thing that, you know, in my research and my study, I realized that most of what we do is in our subconscious mind. And so, we, you know, our brains kind of react based off of these triggers, and these triggers either push us closer to rewards or further away from threats. And so every now and then we have to continue to put in these checkpoints along the way that help to reframe us and help us to move into consciousness so that we can achieve our goals. And so when you talked about you probably just spit them off, but but it's like these things that you've done are these questions that you ask yourself, these thought processes through this deep thinking are allowing you to move through your life faster and in more congruency with your goals rather than meandering along, in the process. And that's what most of us do. So I just wanted to commend you for that. And I really see that as, that it's just a part of who you are. It's not even like, it's like an extension. So I want to ask this, for, I like to help entrepreneurs, and I also like to help um, uh, business professionals as well of color. So the first part, excuse me, there's some, excuse me, man, I got to drink some water here. All these things in the air, springtime, crazy. But as an entrepreneur, tell us about entrepreneurship and building a business for all those who, might be wanting to start a business or looking for some other income options. What advice would you give to
So,
somebody thinking about building a business or business owners just starting out?
first of all, don't. I believe in the value of a job well done and getting paid well for it. If you really want to be an entrepreneur, then start with the end that you really want, because a lot of us, myself included, the mistake I made was back in 2016. I just quit my job. I said, I'm done. And it wasn't even a bad job. I loved working for the company I was working for. I loved the people I worked with. I loved everything about it. It wasn't them. I just felt like if I don't do it now, I probably won't do it. So I had a sense of urgency. That was foolhardy. And I fully admit that, because I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a roadmap. I didn't do the deep thought that I am telling you about. These are hard-learned lessons. And so the first thing I say to anyone who says they want to start a business is, what's your plan? You better have a comprehensive plan to get that first customer. That first customer better lead to second, third, and fourth customers. And you better understand the ramifications of not having a first customer. Because if you can't do that, and I'm not talking a side hustle, I'm not talking about making an extra $200, $300, $400, $500 a month. I'm talking about making significant money, six-figure income, putting together a plan that allows you to employ other people of color who are talented but don't necessarily want to work in the corporate structure anymore. I'm talking about becoming a business owner, right? I have chosen very consciously not to employ other people because I do not want to be responsible for it. I did 20 years of leadership in the military. So my goal was to start a business that was for me sustaining. That was it. But I'm telling you today, if I was 20 years younger and I was starting a business, I'd be looking for people like you and others around me who are talented, because I want to tap into your talent and your skill set. And I want to create an environment, and every entrepreneur needs to be thinking this. I want to create an environment where the people around me are at their best without having to worry about whether or not they're being valued and appreciated. I want to create an environment where people who work for me and work with me feel like they can succeed on their merit and not based on their connection and network. I want people who work with me, and this is what entrepreneurs need to be thinking about right now. If you're serious about starting a business and you want to get a business started, and I don't mean a hustle, you have to be thinking about, can I create an environment for people who look like me, who have been treated like dirt for most of their careers, who may even be traumatized by their work environment, but who can come into my business and develop and feel confident that what they contribute is going to matter to the business owner and the leadership that they work with. If you're serious about owning a business, you need to be thinking like that. And that should shape how you plan, right? Because if you're just trying to replace your income from job X to job Y and you are your own boss, I'm going to tell you, being your own boss is terrible because you work for the worst person in the world, quite frankly, right? Solopreneur is not something. I have a military pension, so if I don't work hard, it doesn't really matter some days. Some days I want to work harder, other days I don't want to work at all. But I'm telling you, if I were 20 years younger and I was starting a business, this is what I would do. I'd be trying a business that would create significant income for myself and others so that I could begin to build a team of talented people. A lot of them rejected from corporate America because they didn't look right, because their hair was natural and they didn't want to conform and straighten their hair. They didn't want to conform and cut their dreads off.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want people who are trying to conform. I want people who feel like they were ostracized for being themselves, because those people, they have experiences, they have talent, they have skill, they have drive that has never been tapped into. And building a business like that is probably the most important element of, and I worked for somebody who built that business, and I helped him. He's made over $100 million in the last 10 years in revenue. And I helped him in about 7 of those 10 years, or 6 of those 10 years, build that revenue stream. I was his primary strategist in that business. Mm-hmm. And I still consult with him. He's still one of my clients. So I'm telling you that if you're going to build a business, you need to be thinking not just how do I take care of myself and my family, but how do I create an environment that invites people of color who've been ostracized by a business environment that does not like them being themselves, and turn that into a strength that turns, and the game is out there. There's opportunity out here for people like you and me, Black people, brown people, to use their talent, who think incongruently, who are amazing at improvisation, who are great with interpersonal skills. Mm-hmm. I have met so many professionals of color who have been undervalued by their organizations because they either chose not to conform, could not conform, or they did conform and found that to be unsatisfying.
Man, this is an area that a lot of Black and brown professionals of color go through, which is like not knowing where they fit in and how authentic can they be. And sometimes they feel like they're not being true to themselves. Other times they feel like they're being true to themselves, but every time they're true to themselves, they get ostracized for it. They get castrated for it financially, professionally. And, that's kind of the area where I specialize into as well, is really helping people to be themselves authentically, and be able to express themselves appropriately, and not appropriately as far as appropriate for white people, but appropriately as far as your connections with others in general. And I think that that's really important. Like, we have to know how to regulate our emotions at work, especially being professionals of color. We're going through trauma from past generations. We're also going through trauma right now. And a lot of time we're not even aware of that. We're not aware of this trauma, and it's taking its toll on us. And a lot of people can't carry that weight, or they do carry it, but it is destroying them on the inside, and they're not able to express those emotions, and they feel like they're not themselves. And so, you talked about your struggle, that you told me personally that there was this kind of medium place, or this place that you had to get to in your professional career where you could be yourself and also still be respectful of other people that you're around. So tell me a little bit about that process.
So, I spent a long time in the military, and I became much more militant. And I would say it's not as a result, but it was during. And one of the reasons why I became more militant was because I began to see a pattern of behavior that I didn't like. So, I told you earlier I was into Black military history. And one of the things that our military history doesn't want to address very much is Executive Order 9981, which integrated the military in 1947. President Truman signed it. What did not happen after that executive order was signed, however, was the culture of racism that existed in the military prior to that executive order. So when you study the history of the military, it was the vanguard of social change, in that we were asked to integrate before most of the society was ready. But there were, because people came from the larger society into the military, there were still those tensions. And those tensions resulted in riots. and there were riots during World War II in Australia, in California, during World War I in Chicago. Our military riots have traveled throughout our military history, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have all the way up into the 70s, there were riots in the military by military members about the treatment they received because of race, right? So when you understand that, you begin to understand that there's going to be this cultural challenge that you have to overcome. Part of it is understanding what that challenge means. So what I learned was I had to be comfortable with my skin color. I'm 6'4", my size, right? My voice. I can be very intimidating and loud when I need to be. And I had to learn how to navigate all of those dynamics. And for my sisters in the military, they had other problems because they weren't physically as imposing. So they had to get over the angry black woman syndrome that a lot of women have to face in places where they're not considered the majority or even commonplace. I have a lot of sisters who are the only black woman officer on a base. So, how do you navigate all that? And so what I learned over time was that my blackness was something that I had to carry with me internally. And I had to let it out in ways that were within the boundaries of the culture that I was in, the military culture that I was in, but at the same time were a different way of expression inside that culture. So I learned how to do my own forms of jazz, how I walked, or when I was playing music in my office when nobody was in it, I'd play it maybe just a little loud enough so that the people walking by would hear some hip hop or hear some Coltrane or hear some Miles Davis. I would do these, I would find these ways to express myself in my culture that were consistent with what I was. Whenever I needed to go back into history to present a historical precedent, I would look for the 332nd Tank Destroyer Battalion. I would look for the Tuskegee Airmen. I'd look for 362nd Tank Destroyer Battalion, the Tuskegee Airmen. I'd look for Dory Miller. I'd look for the examples from my culture that apply to the situation. I did a series of presentations for one of my units where I dove back into military history and used all sorts of countercultural principles in order to get my group to be more creative. And I told them they needed to agitate for change. They needed to really think about being, revolutionary, right? So I called them be revolutionary, agitate for change, and to really think through some of the things. And I would go back in the past and I would bring the examples forward from our history to force people to think that these are the ways. Like I say, General Benjamin O. Davis Jr., who graduated from West Point, for the 4 years he was a cadet at West Point. On official business, unless it was official business, no other cadets, because he was the only black cadet at the time, would talk to him. So if it wasn't official business in a social capacity, no cadet talked to him.
Okay.
So how do you translate that? So what you do is you say, what kind of strength of character, what kind of courage does it take for a young man of 20, 21 years old to go through 4 years of social ostracism? Can I learn from that? And now can I take that lesson and can I apply it to other things? And more importantly, can I bring that lesson forward and be conscious and present that lesson to a mainstream culture that doesn't know that story? And now my blackness has become an asset because now I can take those stories of people like him, present them to my students or my troops, and begin to use those stories as a way for them to build themselves up. Now, this is a very subtle way, but this is my expression of who I am. By being able to tap into these old stories, this history, and bring it forward and use it and employ it in a way that allows me to say, see, I am black too. And my culture is a part of the success of this organization. Mm-hmm. And my story has a place right here. Mm-hmm. And when I did that consistently over time, I got more and more militant. But my militant wasn't, free the people. It was, there's a situation where I can use my history, my black history, as an example for all of my people. Mm-hmm. Then I became, as I did it more and more, I became so good at it that it was seamless to me. I
Mm-hmm.
was able to express myself in my culture in a way that nobody could challenge. I was unfadable, as they say in hip hop, right? I
I
was
think
unfadable
I think
because
part of that I think part of that is because you had some understanding of the people that you were working with, and I when I talk about interpersonal relationships, it's important that we understand I talk about this level of awareness, awareness of self, the awareness of culture, and the awareness of the social environment around you. I've expanded that
mhm,
in cultural emotional intelligence because in traditional emotional intelligence, it's they only talk about self awareness, which um, in my opinion, the self awareness that dominant culture has, that white culture has, is not true self awareness because they don't understand themselves or other cultures, and they don't have to because of the social position of whiteness. And so this kind of gap in awareness is something that they can actually get away with because of their social position. But what I teach, professionals of color that I'm working with is that we can't get away with that, and we need to expand our awareness to not just self-awareness. We need to know who we are in self. We need to know our culture and ethnicity. We need to know the social environment around us, because we can't afford as many missteps as they can, because they've already started at a different place than us. And so in order to compete, in any sport or or any arena, you have to be able to take as many advantages that you can. You don't want to come in there with a huge handicap more than you already have and try to win the game. So I think that what you talked about, that interpersonal awareness of self and like what you could push till, and probably had some experiential knowledge associated with it, of being in the military and then realizing how some of the habits, some of the identities of the different folks in the military, and being able to um, um, influence, slowly but methodically, and see what the result is, and see what you got, and see the feedback. And so that's great that you were able to express yourself in that way, express yourself um, authentically in who you are, and it also added to your identity. One thing I want to ask you is I want to know about some of the challenges. I want to know some of the
mhm.
challenges that you've had um, on just a human level, and I want to know some of the challenges that you face specifically as a professional of color. So I want to talk, because I feel like it's important to be able to go in and out. There's some things that we all face as human beings, which are common to color or ethnicity. And then there's more specific ones that we actually have to dive into culturally and ethnically, because these type of behaviors are showing up more in this particular group or in this particular setting. So first, as you're moving up your professional career, and also starting to move into your entrepreneurial career, what challenges have you had just on a human level? Explain those, and then name some challenges as a professional of color.
Sure. So probably one of the most common things that I had to face was, I was overseas in Japan and then in Portugal, and there is an appreciation for a culture that you learn from visiting, and there's another one you get from living within it. And as an American who lived in Japan and an American who lived in Portugal, I got a chance to live in neighborhoods, especially in Portugal. I lived in a Portuguese neighborhood. I was just a neighbor, and I learned so much. And what I learned was that the color of my skin mattered less in certain environments than it did in others. And I love being in those nations where I was an anomaly. When I was in Japan, I was treated like an NBA superstar. They would look at me like, who are you? And I was like, I'm nobody. And they go like, can I have your autograph? I sign many autographs as a star of unknown origin.
Did you sign it
Right?
black man? Did you sign black man on the like just black man number 3 million? Like.
Sure. Right. It was fun though. But to answer your question directly, on a human level, probably the thing that I saw most was, relationship problems. I counseled so many people who went through divorce. I counseled so many people who just had problems with their fellow workers. And the counseling wasn't bad. It wasn't, they weren't angry. They were just misunderstanding each other. 99% of the things I ever counseled was a simple misunderstanding. That is the most common cultural, the most common interpersonal thing I dealt with was just a basic misunderstanding. Sometimes a boss doesn't mean to say what they said, not because they were insulting or denigrating in any way, but they was frustrated, and their frustration came out in their language. And so you would just have to deal with the frustration and say, let's work out what you're frustrated over versus what you said during the frustration. By getting away from the words and getting to the heart of the matter, I began to understand that people really just needed to be heard. And once they were heard and understood, almost, like I said, 99% of the time, I could bring down the pain. I could bring down the animosity. I could bring down the strife. And I could get people to work together just by getting people to listen, not for the words, but for the message, the intent behind the words. And once I did that, it was the easiest thing. So from a very human level, that was probably the most illuminating element of my leadership journey, was just getting people to hear one another.
And then what challenges did you face as a professional of color?
Oh, well, since sometimes I was the only Black person in my organization, I was the only Black officer in my organization. That's still common today, 20, 25 years after after it happened to me. That it just so few officers out of a class of almost 1,000 that graduated with me at the Air Force Academy, not even 40 of us were Black. So you're talking about, and then again of the sisters, only about, I think I graduated with 8 or 10 sisters in my class. So it wasn't a lot of Black women, officers, Black officers in general. And then, my friends who are pilots, less than 2% of all pilots in the Air Force are Black. So, we're always in this environment where we're the only, which means that all eyes on us. I mean, straight out of Tupac, all eyes on me, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this inherent pressure, especially because you don't want to be the example of negativity. You don't want to be the example of foolishness. You don't want to be the example of bad behavior. So that all those eyes on you at all times,
that pressure
makes you, it's a huge pressure.
Yeah.
And I know so many professional color who don't want that pressure. They just want to be whatever they are. I'm telling you, I wish it were so, but it's not. And as I rose through the ranks, the pressure increased because there are fewer and fewer people who look like me. When I was a senior captain, when I was a major, and as a lieutenant colonel, I was rare among, like, I'm in DC, in the DC area. So there was many of us here, but when I was in the field, forget it. I was a squadron commander, and I might be the only one squadron commander. I might be the only one that I had to deal with. So this pressure is real. And one of the things that I learned was I couldn't succumb to the pressure, but I couldn't ignore it, right? So I had to find this middle ground where I said, the pressure is real, but I'm going to be my best for me. And they'll see me being my best for me. And whatever that looked like, I was okay with. So some years I was number one rated amongst all my peers, and other times I wasn't. But I was never driven to be number one. I was driven to be my best self. And what I counsel many young men and women, and I still do, is I tell them, your peers are looking at you regardless of if you want them to or not. But the most important response you have to them is, are you true to who you are? Because you being less than what you consider your best reflects on how they see you. It doesn't matter if you're the only Black officer or not. What matters is, are you being your best self? And the challenge that I always put in front of them is, what does your best self intend to bring out versus what it looks like? Because being number one amongst the collection of mediocre people is not an achievement.
Right. And that's why I work with high performers. That's I'm
not here for that number one of average.
Of lacking.
I want you, if you're in the middle of a pack and your pack is all Michael Jordan, LeBron James, and Kobe Bryant, I'm okay with you being average in that pack.
Yeah.
I'm not okay with you being number one of the average. I want you to be average in the pack of number one.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we get people to start thinking that way, what's your best self? What's your best self? Then it's not about the pressure anymore. It's about when you look in the mirror, who are you and how you bring that out. And that's why your history is so important. That's why I talk to professional color about learning who your examples are.
That's a great segue into what I want to ask next, which is describe that process, Emille. That process of pain and liberation and discovering who you were culturally and ethnically. I want you just a short snip on that process.
Sure. The pain, probably the most painful moment in my career, I describe in my book, Start with a Sparkle. I worked for a boss who saw me as something I was not, and I could never get that boss to change their perception. I don't know what it was about me or whether it was about the boss. I just know that we were never going to see eye to eye. So it was painful. How did I overcome that? Well, one of the things I learned was that I had a rapport with my airmen that maybe my boss didn't have and maybe my boss envied. So that rapport was my saving grace. That rapport was me connecting with people who spoke a language I was comfortable speaking, and I used that language to help me in my professional endeavor. I found a way to connect with them, and they talked to me, and they helped me through. They didn't know they were helping me, by the way. They had no idea I was going through because I kept a stoic countenance, right? But what my rapport with them gave me was, one, it gave me a chance to just be myself and just be sort of, just be Black, just be ethnic. But it also gave me insight into what they were working on, which was directly responsible for how I saw my job every day and what I was doing on my job every day. So my rapport became a way for me to get information that was hard to access, and I got the nuts and bolts of the things that I needed to know in my job from that rapport. So the pain was being somebody who was seen in a way that was just not me, and not knowing why. Eventually, I surmised, based on some data, not just based on thinking, that it was my skin color that was the problem. But I didn't know it at the time. It was a little bit later I found that out. But the resolution to that pain was going into my culture and using my connection with people who were like me and using that as a way to bridge two gaps. One, the professional gap, I needed knowledge and they had it and they were willing to share it with me. And two, the personal gap. I had a place to go where I could exercise a little bit of my culture in a healthy way, right? Without breaking the rules of fraternization or inappropriate relationships. I never did that. But I did have a way of speaking to them that allowed them to see, hey, this is a cat who we can trust and we can talk to, and who, when we give him information, uses it in a way that helps us work and do our best. And I got out of that, again, the professional part, the cultural part, and I got a chance to understand that it's okay for me to be myself in certain situations, especially when I was under distress. And I was able to resolve the issue. I fortunately had a boss above that boss who saw all of my travails and pulled me out of it before it affected my career long term. But it was the most turbulent part of my time. But I had a resolution that I found, and I did it by, with Sam Walton says, MBWA, management by walking around. I just got good at walking around and speaking of the people that I was working with, especially the people who shared a culture with me. That was by far and away the most powerful lesson I learned in that period.
Well, one of the things that is sad is that we have to worry about or think about, being ourselves. Like the question with so many Black and brown folks is like, how do I be myself? Like how can I be my authentic self? And it seems like we, either assimilate to a form of ourselves that can be disgusting, right? This pseudo, I don't want to say, I don't want to say jucking and jiving, but we get into this, we start to assimilate into this version of ourselves that at first we can't recognize, and then sometimes if it's left untreated, that becomes our new identity. Or we bite our tongue, we grit our teeth, and we just die on the inside with anger and frustration and resentment. And one of the positives of this whole situation is that I've seen and I've been able to develop some strategies for myself that have allowed me, while I was in HR in these different environments, to be myself, like be authentically me. And I felt like a big part of that was my ability to communicate and connect. And I feel like once you're able to learn those interpersonal skills and understand yourself culturally, you can fuse the two. And that's where I really talk about cultural emotional intelligence. Is you can be you. You can say what you need to say. You have to know when to say it, how to say it. And I think that when and you've seen it. You've seen certain Black and brown folks who you're like, what? He didn't get fired for that? Like, no, he didn't get fired for that because there was a way he did it. He can say, there's a way you could probably do a lot of things, but it depends on, when you say it, how you say it, and that, and your ability to connect interpersonally. So, you described some of the pain, the trials that you went through, trying to be yourself, just being a person, just being a Black man in these whitened environments. But there was a process and a journey to it. And you talked about some of the authors that kind of inspired you. I want you to kind of give us, who are the people that we need to be reading, or who would you recommend if we're just starting out in this process of discovery? Top 5, top 10 people, whatever you want to do, that we need to, at least Black people can read to start developing.
I'll be straight up with you. If you want Black people to start to express their culture in a healthy way in the workforce, they have to know from where they've come. Mm-hmm. And it starts with Frederick Douglass, W.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, Ida B. Wells, Sojourner Truth, Mary McLeod Bethune. Like, you got to go back to the roots, and you got to understand what Black people in America have been. I know our story as Black people does not start in America, but this is where I live. This is my home. And so I have to have an understanding of what I face every day. So I go back to those very seminal authors. You got to have artists like Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston who are going to give you the creative translation of the pain, right? The artist gives you a reframe, right? So one of the greatest philosophers in modern history, American history, is James Brown, but nobody knows because they know his music. But if you don't know his story, you understand why I call him one of the greatest American philosophers. You got to get into the artist and the stories behind the artist. One of the greatest mathematicians and physicists of all time, is John Coltrane. You got to understand the artist and the pain that they go through and the struggle. You got to understand one of the greatest statesmen of our time was Dizzy Gillespie. Another great statesman was Louis Armstrong. You got to understand those stories. As you come forward from the roots, then you can begin to normalize based on the current times and the current culture. And you start reading people like Ta-Nehisi Coates, and you start reading about Michelle Alexander, and you start reading these people who understand how to translate what's going on now so that you can begin to understand. So you got to have root and current, and you have to have the bridge in between. And if you don't have the root, the current doesn't make sense, because you say, well, why are we here dealing with this in 2020? Haven't we solved this problem? And the answer is no, but you have to understand why that no exists. And it's not one person's fault. It's not Dr. King for being nonviolent. It's not Malcolm X for being self-determined. It's not about, Black people not having a proper work ethic, right? Because the hardest working people in this nation have been consistently Black people, so it's a fallacy to think that we're not working hard enough. You say, well, why aren't you guys rich? And you say, well, you have to have an understanding that places like Black Wall Street in Tulsa and Rosewood in Florida, like all of these different places where the wealth was literally stolen, you have to understand the history of this nation, why lynching was so powerful, because more often than not, a lynching occurred because a Black man had accumulated some wealth that a white person wanted to steal. And so lynching was the fastest way to take that wealth out of the family. But we don't talk about that. We don't have the historical references to that. So when you say, well, when you look at Boston and you see that Black people in Boston have an average net worth of $5, there is a historical reason for that. It's not laziness and it's not racism. There are structural decisions that were made that allowed the government, whether it's state, federal, or local, that allowed the government to be used as an instrument of violence against people. One group of people would use the government as an instrument of violence against another group of people deliberately, and that would transfer wealth from the oppressed to the oppressor through the instrument of violence. That instrument of violence had a name in the federal government called redlining. Right? There are these principles that history would tell us that allow us to learn how to navigate our future and our present much more deftly. But we have to start at the basics. We have to start with the people who really wrote down and gave us the historical precedent so that we can come forward wisely. Until we do that, what we're doing is we're saying, I'm ignorant of the history of why I'm where I am. Right? And I've never used history as an anchor. It's not even a crutch, but it is a guide. And so our goal should be to learn our history so that we know where we've come from, but more importantly, we know how to deal with situations. Because somewhere in this history, somebody has dealt with the same exact situation before, and they resolved it successfully. And so that is how professionals of color learn how to overcome.
Is through knowing our history and knowing who we are. Yes, I totally agree. I'd like to get a couple more questions from you before we wrap up. One is, what are some of the mindsets and mentalities that we should adopt as Black people that can create more abundance, impact, and success personally and professionally?
The number one mindset that affects your abundance, that affects your ability to create and achieve the goals that you want, is the belief that there is no obstacle you cannot overcome. It is a belief. And a friend of mine, Rashad Howard, he runs consulting and a course called The Key to Everything. And the number one thing that you learn from The Key to Everything is that you control your inputs and the outcomes take care of themselves. So my belief, based on the inputs that I take in every day, is that there's nothing I cannot do. Either I have the inherent capacity to learn it, either I have access to the resources to achieve it, or I know somebody who can. And between those three, nothing I face is impossible. I'll tell you, we got to get out of the mindset that I have to do it all myself. There's no asterisk on Jeff Bezos' $1 billion because he got help. Black people need to get out of that mindset that they can't get help or that there's some negative. Kobe Bryant did not win championships by himself. He had teammates. We got to get out of this. Black people and brown people have got to get out of the mindset that there's this myth of rugged individualism that we somehow are tainted if we got help. Everybody who has done this,
nobody's self-made. Yeah.
They got help, and we got to get. Nothing is impossible because I have access to every person, tool, resource, frame of mind that I need. But we have to be willing to accept that there is no asterisk on success because you got help.
Mm-hmm. That's powerful. Because you frame mindset in such a way that, like, even though all these different acts of white supremacy and white control and dominance, you're saying that there's a way, and just that even, that it's possible. It is possible. And just having that mindset first is, I think, where we have to start. Because if we're already defeated, then we start to turn to alternatives like individualism and only doing things for ourselves because we don't feel like nothing is ever going to change. And so just having that mindset, right, and that shift of it is possible. It is possible, young man or young woman or old man, old woman. Like, if there was a way that to get into this, there's a way to get out. There's a way to move. There's a way to transition. And it might not be in our lifetime, but the process, the work that we do can lead to that. And so what I want to do is I want to
let me hit you with something real quick.
Uh-huh.
Let me hit you something real quick what you just said, because this is something that I think a lot of us need to hear. There is an external enemy that is trying to hurt you. Let's be very clear. But you're not going to change that external enemy. You just know it's there and address it accordingly. But you also must remember that there's an internal struggle. And the internal struggle is the one that we can control. I don't want to discount what's happening out there, nor do I want it to have exclusive blame for the situation, right? It exists, it is. We all work to change that external factor, right? That racism, white supremacy. We all work to change that. But we also need to, in parallel, work on ourselves. Mm-hmm. The two must be addressed simultaneously. If I work exclusively on myself, my enemy will just get more savvy at attacking me, and I'll still break down. Mm-hmm. If I work exclusively on the external enemy, and I don't focus on myself, then even if I change that, I haven't become what I'm intended to be. Mm-hmm. So it's got to be both and not either or. Okay. And that's a challenge because we often want to go for the thing we can see, right? Mm-hmm. The external factors, without realizing that we have control. And a lot of us, we tend to overcompensate and say, well, it's only a matter of mindset, and not remember that there are structural, institutional, systemic factors that affect Black people in this society. We can't ignore that. Mm-hmm. So I always liken it to, if I'm in war and I am in a tank, no matter how good the armor is on my tank, if the person is shooting at me enough, they'll eventually break down my armor. Mm-hmm. So building up my tank's not enough. I have to have, part of my fight has to be to stop the attack. But if I focus exclusively on stopping the attack, then my tank breaks down because nobody's taking care of it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it can't be either or. It has to be both and. And it has to be us being responsible to ourselves and saying, I accept that the external conditions are under my control and I will work to change them as much as I can. I also agree that I am responsible for me and I will work to change me. Then it's a matter of doing both in whatever priority you feel works best for your life.
Well, since you already kind of alluded to this, I want to talk about white supremacy. How do you define white supremacy in your mind and your vocabulary?
It's multifaceted and incredibly broad and its own conversation. To keep it very short and simple, white supremacy is the violence perpetrated against others, whether or not an individual of the majority culture intends to. And so these attacks come in the form of elevating mediocrity, right? So you can have people who are being promoted into positions of authority in a workplace who clearly do not have the qualifications that others do. Mm-hmm. But because they meet a certain criteria based on their skin color, they're promoted, right? And they'll always, and I've heard this many times over, and white supremacy is very good for having these intangible factors as part of it. So white supremacy is being able to say that it's a meritocracy when it really isn't. White supremacy is being able to say it's really a representative democracy when it really isn't. White supremacy is being able to say that your personal contribution to an organization is all that matters when it's really not. And we see it over and over again that mediocrity is rewarded, excellence is overlooked, and your complaint is relegated to, your legitimate complaint is relegated to a gripe or you're a problem for addressing it. Mm-hmm. And that, you know, is less of a definition, more of a set of examples. But really, that's what white supremacy is. It's just the ability to take mediocrity and elevate it whenever it suits the person who is acting in that way.
Well, how has white supremacy impacted your growth and development personally and professionally? What strategies have you used to combat whiteness and white supremacy?
I would say that my military career was probably stunted by white supremacy, despite the fact that I had the records of someone who should have accelerated far and fast in the military. Mm-hmm. I didn't go as far and as fast as my records would have indicated. Mm-hmm. That's fairly common amongst professionals of color in the military. The way that I dealt with it was I got out. I left. I wasn't going to fight an uphill battle that wasn't winnable. And once I got out, I worked for Fortune 500 companies and you know, was making, you know, decent money for sure. But I just decided that I didn't want the game anymore. And that was my primary reason for starting my own business. I was at a point where money was less important to me. My kids were out of the house. So I decided that I was going to chart my own course. And even if I failed, I succeeded because it was my course to chart. Mm-hmm. So when I was in the military, I was exceptionally professional. I took, you know, one of the boss I referred to earlier in this conversation said this about me. I was a major at the time. She said, Major Bryant can take a beating like no person I've ever met. Meaning she could berate me, she could humiliate me in public, and I was never going to show her anything but professional courtesy. And I won based on that. Mm. I was the winner long term. Mm-hmm. Short term, I looked like a loser. I got beat up a lot. But mm-hmm. long term, I was the winner. And that was because I retained my composure, because I let that individual show their behind. I won. Because at the end of the day, my reputation was gold and that reputation was mud. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the moral victory is the only one you're going to get, and I got it, and that was enough for me.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the key things that you talked about was you pivoted. I mean, like a lot of people, like and I coach my clients that, you know, if you're looking for a particular goal and you say that this is what I want, it doesn't have to come in the form that you saw when you first thought of the idea. Sometimes you can still create the same end result through a different method. And if that method is, going into business for yourself, that's okay. And if that method is, uh, taking your career and, professionally and in the corporate arena, that's okay too. But people, I think you can't be so married to the method as much as the end result. Like, okay, is it going to help you to be with your kids the amount of time that you want? Is it going to give you the financial resource that you want? Is it going to be able to give you the autonomy that you want? You have to really think about those things, rather than being so caught in these anchors of parameter that we put on ourselves. These mental parameters are the things that keep us from achieving the highest level of results. Because
Absolutely.
when I listen to
Absolutely.
the most successful, the most influential folks, and this is, black, brown, and white folks, they all talk about, that they've had to make pivots. They haven't sacrificed the goal, but a lot of the methods in which they did it, they had to change, because they want this and that and that. Then you might not be able to do it the way that you originally thought out. And being able to divorce the method and keep the goal is so important, I think.
One of the companies I work with is called Pivot. You can find it at pivotforthepeople.com. And that principle is exactly what we do. We help people make that pivot. And the reason why it's important is because most people don't know you can make that pivot. They don't even understand that that is a possibility in your control.
Mm-hmm.
So you saying that is powerful because it gets people away from this linear thinking. I got to go from A to B to C to D. I always tell people my career is A, Q, purple, 7, B, X,
Right.
Fifth Street. Like it's never been linear. And this, people of color, we've been told, and I'll say we've been sold a bill of goods that you got to follow these steps to be successful. So we follow the steps, but we don't get the success. And then we get frustrated because we think we did something wrong. We didn't do anything wrong. The lie was that you follow the steps.
Mm-hmm.
That was the lie. The lie is, I love education. I think every person should get a formal education after high school. But I also think that an informal education is far more important. So whether it's formal or informal, continuing education is the way we're going to see ourselves getting through past the method to the goal. Because that continuing education, I'm a firm believer in trades. I went to Benson Polytechnic High School, so I believe in trade. I believe in formal education. It was a good day, right?
Yeah.
Go Techman. Right? And so whether it's a trade or formal education, whether it's white collar, blue collar, whether it's entrepreneurship, whether it's a side hustle or a main hustle, I don't care. But I need people to be conscious of what they're doing so they can achieve what they say they want. And I want what they say they want to be influenced by themselves and not by the culture. Having a big car and a nice home is not what you should want. It should be what you say you need in order to live your best life without trying to keep up with the Joneses and the Smiths and the Browns and the Whites and the Grays.
Mm-hmm.
It should be because you say this is the thing that will make me happy. And then when you do the self-examination, you begin to learn that happiness is not dependent on the thing, it's dependent upon you and your mindset. So this pivot is powerful. It's for professionals of color, and it gets us out of this linear thinking. And I'm just, man, more power to you for even coming to that, coming with that in your coaching. Because I'm telling you, so many professionals of color are focused on the path, and they miss out on the life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've had lots of experience with that in my own life, and realizing that, sometimes you just got to get it done dirty, man. Like you just got to get, like, sometimes sometimes you can do all the planning that you want. And then you just got to push it past that next level of overdrive. you got to get it. You just got to get it how you get it, man. I mean, I'm not saying go rob a bank, but sometimes you got to get it done dirty. And
You just got to get it done. Yeah.
and your ability to tap into that almost primal mind, because a lot of people talk about, you're going to talk about a lot of that the higher mind that we need to be able to influence, our primitive brain and get us to where we're going. But sometimes you just got to, I talk about this. I said, you got to go access the dog in you. You got to you got to go talk to that dog, and that dog doesn't care if he pees in your yard. He does. If he got to go, he got to go. And so sometimes it's like, you said you want to go build this business. Go out there and build this business. Yeah, I know that they just, told you that you're not going to get the loan, and they told you that this is this, and your marketing strategy is all wrong and whatever. I'm not saying don't have any plan, but what I'm saying is sometimes you just got to go get it. Like, you got to go get it. You got to go talk to as many people as you can. You got to look stupid. You got to go have dirty shoes, dirty everything. But at the end of it, you'll be able to hold up that trophy, because the trophy is what you wanted in the first place, and now you got it.
Right.
But you had to become something more than just you, and you had to become you had to shed some things, and sometimes that going into that inner dog is really what's going to give you that motivation to be able to get there. So I really appreciate
I agree.
What you talked about when we're talking about pivot. Man, be adaptable. Be adaptable in your mind. Have that cognitive agility. We got to have that so that we can get to where we need to get, especially as professionals of color, because the way is not paved for us. We got to go out there on the side roads and in the dusty roads, and then later, with enough of us going to these dusty roads, it will be paved for those behind us. But that's just what it is. So yeah, man.
Amen. Yeah, you said it. I have nothing to add to that. Go get it.
Gotta go get it. And so finally, Emille, man, how can we support you? Where can we find you at? Those two things have to happen. Audience, look, there's gonna be some people on here that get game, and they get knowledge, and they get understanding, and they go and they take it, and they don't give back. And that's not what I'm about. That's not what Emanuel Solomon Training and Coaching is about. That's not what Black empowerment is about. So if it's as simple as going and liking somebody's page, or going and doing a coaching session, or supporting somebody in that way, go to Black and brown folks. If you're Black and brown, I mean, like, why is that weird? Why is that crazy?
Not at all.
So many people do that. So many cultures, white culture does it now that they've been able to just use whiteness. So many other cultures, it's how you stay alive from generation to generation. And we are, one of the things that bothers me is that we're being culturally disintegrated, and we're trying to, we're giving away our resources for free. So look, find somebody who you can support, who's Black or brown, and do it. And start with something. Do it now. Look, you don't have to go big. I'm not saying, you need to go right now and go, give $100,000, but go right now and go to his website, or go to his different social media platforms and check him out. That's easy. That's small. Do that, and you're giving back, and that reciprocity will come back to you. So how do we support you? How can we support you? Where can we find you at?
So again, you can find me at myname.com, Emille, EMILLE BRYANT, EmilleBryant.com. You can read my book, Start with a Sparkle.com, just like it sounds. And you can take my course, which is actually free. If you want to start shifting your mindset, take my free course, Awaken to Brazen Creativity at www.brazencreativity.com. I offer the free course because I'm trying to get people out of the mindset that you have to go linear. You should be able to take your talent and your skill and develop it however you want to. If you are interested in talking to me one-on-one, come to my website and you can get a free 20-minute consultation with me to see if we can work together. I am down to help every one of your listeners, everybody who's on this podcast. So if you mention Emanuel Solomon Coaching and Training, when we talk, I will know that you heard this podcast. I will make sure you're taken care of, and I'll come up with a great deal for you. I won't say it's 15% off or anything like that. I'm just going to say that once I know you listen to this podcast, I got you back.
Right.
So
Emanuel
come to
Solomon Training and Coaching. So
there it is, Emanuel Solomon Training and Coaching. Get hip. If you're on this podcast and you want to talk to me, you can come to my website, set up a one-on-one time, mention that you were here, and I got you.
Thank you so much, Emille. This is the People Man Talks podcast. I'm your host, Emmanuel Solomon, the People Man, and I'm out.